As I can see, I'm kind of tired. Taking those 3 Seroquel last night was a bit much. But the conversation must go on. It's interesting because I look at the stuff I've written down, and with the Seroquel in my body, it just doesn't look very interesting. I was listening to the Crazy Wise town hall meeting online today, and Gabor Mate was talking about how trauma and childhood issues lead to mental health problems. And I was thinking about how if there is trauma in childhood, it pushes a person off their original trajectory of how they would develop in an ideal scenario. Most people don't experience an ideal scenario. Who knows what that even is? And I've talked about the original trajectory, which is sort of like the adjacent light body. And I feel that map consciousness is a process that's attempting to put us back in touch with our original trajectory. So in that way, it's a healing process because we're healing towards our original trajectory. And in a way, the original trajectory is a non-trajectory, as it's a fluidity in which we're not adjusting ourselves based on our past traumas. When we have traumas, then we have a rigidity in that we're reacting to elements of the present as if they were the past, because we see that they could lead to things that happened before. And in a way, the meds make thoughts better or worse. Really what the problem is thought. But we don't question thought itself. We're just hoping to make them more bearable. So the medications, in a way, work on thought. It changes our thoughts, and a lot of times the hope is to limit them down to a very narrow nature, so we're not thinking about things beyond the scope of what society is designed to be a function of. And in a way, society has its meanings of success and growth and progress and things. So if we start getting into this meaning-making state in our brain where we're making meanings outside the meanings of society, then it's not really functional within the supposed functions of society. But in a way, this process is a function of the brain that gets us functioning in the sphere of meaning, especially when the meanings of society right now together are leading us as a species towards destruction, and of the planet too. And Robert Whitaker mentioned that psychosis is increased dopamine, or that happens in psychosis. Not saying that that's necessarily a brain disease, but what I was thinking about in terms of that is that I feel we're all addicted to dopamine, and when we go into map consciousness, we actually decouple from the dopamine circuits temporarily, and we experience a different world not based on reward and punishment. But when the brain has gone too far or too long in that state, the dopamine has to ramp up extra high in order to sort of rein consciousness back into its regular sphere. So to me, it's like this hyper dopamine net just trying to recapture consciousness into the limited sphere of society. And it's actually scary because being very expansive and coming back to a very limited sphere is scary. And somebody asked the question, well, what kind of thinking should we have around mental health struggles? And I feel that having any kind of thinking around it is a barrier, because those would be beliefs, and those expanded states or meaning making states. Of course, if perception is expanded beyond the regular meanings and seeings of society, it's going to feel meaningful. And so we're going to create new meanings. But to believe any of those meanings is a bit of an error, because the process is kind of infinite. So if one clings to anything, then it's actually reducing the infinite process. So really, it's to see that we're infinite processors of infinity, and we can have lots of different experiences. And if we don't cling to them, then it can be a never-ending process. But to say, oh, this process that initiates meaning making, we have to put some kind of framework around it in a way that is trying to limit this unlimited process, this unlimited perception, this unlimited voice. If one is in touch with that infinity and one can speak as infinity, one wouldn't necessarily need to put a framework on it. And that's sort of what we've done, even by believing that we're these separate me entities. We've put a limit on our infinite seeing by thinking of ourselves in terms of this accumulated psychological knowledge about ourselves. And those images are what actually keeps us from seeing and speaking infinitely. Beliefs and frameworks are words, and words can never really capture that infinite process by which those words are created when one is in that meaning-making state. And they were asking about the new narrative, and I think the new narrative is constant narration without the narrator. Who is this narrator? The narrator is one that wants to form this consistent story about something, to make something consistent. But the whole process of map consciousness shows we're not this consistent entity. We are moving, fluxing, flowing, and then to come back and then say, well, I need to define that somehow. That prevents going into the undefined state. So in a way, it's an undefined narrator or narration that happens when there's no narrator there. It's a narration of the moment. And in that way, we're culturing the language of the moment by trying to create frameworks for this process. We're framing the very process of ourselves. And I was thinking about how the chemistry in the brain is partially due to the words in the brain. So if we have words of me this and me that, and I want this and I want that, and referencing everything to this me image entity, those resonances, those sounds are going to be producing the chemistry. So by speaking as the me, we create dopamine, serotonin, and different things like that in the brain. And partly I think that the brain is tired of itself. It's tired of the me. It's tired of this image approximation of the total that isn't even close to approximating the whole. The brain wants to be whole. So the me and I want this and I want that, reward and punishment creates dopamine, but that's actually sound, language, words. And then when one says, oh yay, I got my reward, then one gets the dopamine. So the dopamine is actually part of the me and the language we're speaking in our head. So I think it's important to realize it's a new language of not speaking in terms of the me. So I wonder, what is the language that creates DMT and the so-called flow molecules. Because when people are in flow, they usually aren't thinking, because often they're doing some kind of extreme sport, which, if they're thinking, that's going to mess up the flow. But is there a language that one can speak where one isn't thinking? One's not pre-forming their words. Can one speak as the moment? And then, if one is doing that, just with the way that language is being created in the brain, it could change the biochemistry of the brain. So if I want a cookie and then, oh yeah, I got my cookie, creates dopamine. And it can be anything. Each person has something different they're looking for. And it's just words in their head that they're looking to satisfy. So when there's perception and there's no me and no ego. And then Gabor Mate said something about how I feel about myself. And I was thinking, who is this I that's feeling something about itself? And I was thinking about I feel. Just the words I feel. And when I was thinking about the words I feel, I sort of had this sense that as I say I feel X, well, there's the feeling molecule X. But the I and the feel and the X are all the same thing. So if I say I feel sad, now I just sort of imagine that there's this sadness molecule and it's actually in front of my eyes. And it is the I, and it's blocking my perception. So if I just imagine that when I say I feel sad, the sadness molecule flows over my eye and blocks and actually creates the sadness. So I see the world as sad. I'm seeing through my sadness molecules. But what I actually sort of saw, and I have no idea if this is true, but when I say I feel sad, there's the sadness molecule, and overlapping in it and implicit in the information of that sadness molecule are the words I feel sad. So I feel sad is the sadness molecule. And that sadness molecule is the DNA, is from the DNA, is created from the codes of the DNA. So in a way, I feel sad is actually coded in the DNA. And when I say I feel sad, it's also an image, whatever it is that is making me feel sad is part of that sadness molecule. So the molecule of I feel sad is written in the DNA, and the words I feel sad as well as the image. So it's all sort of holographically encoded together in this I feel sad. But what I'm saying is the I that feels sad is that biochemistry. So the words we say, I feel sad, are activating the DNA to create the sad emotion molecule. And the molecule of the emotion also, when we think the thing that's making us feel sad, that image, it's also going in and fluxing through this feeling of sadness. So it's all this one thing. There's no I or me that feels sad. There's this arising of the molecule, the DNA being written to encode that protein of sadness, as well as the words I feel sad, as well as the image. And to me, this in a way shows that when I say I feel sad, it just colors the world as I feel sad, as there's this I feeling sad. But really there's just the world. There's no I there feeling sad except for our sadness molecules, which we're actually just addicted to. So what I'm seeing is that embedded in the way we use language in our brain is what's creating these biochemical states. But we are the biochemical states. The I, the me, is the biochemical state. So there's no me apart from our emotions and our thoughts. And we're mainly just addicted to them. So we're addicted to the self, we're addicted to the me, and to the sense of being separate from reality. Because in a way, if we felt our connectedness to it, we'd actually have to do something. We wouldn't be able to sit on our butts and feel sorry for ourselves. And there's no self to feel sorry for. It's all a trick of words, of how we use words. And again, they're in our brain being used against us and creating the us, creating the me. So in a way, the me, the I, is just a construct of our language. So it's likely not very clear what I'm saying, and I haven't really thought that much about it, but what I'm saying is, when I say I feel, there is no I that feels. But by actually creating this sentence saying I feel, then it makes it seem like there's an I, a person that's feeling it. So I guess this is probably what the book Wholeness in the Implicate Order is going to talk about, is that to say I feel is an illusion. But if I say there is a feeling, or feeling sad, but not that there's this I that's feeling sad, or a feeling of sadness, saying a feeling of sadness in this body. And in a way, there's a different sense to that than saying I feel. When we say I feel, we take it so seriously, and we take it like there's this permanent thing. But if I say there's a feeling of sadness, well, the next moment there could be a feeling of happiness. So the more we say I feel sad, the more we reinforce the I. We say I all day long, and that's just reinforcing the I, and it's actually restricting the eyes, like the actual physical eyes. What we see is limited because of saying I this, I that, and being attached to this entity and its memories inside that isn't really there. And so the biomolecule is the blinder. And the trouble with the I, too, is that when I say I feel sad, it accumulates all the images of sadness over time to the point where it's built up. Whereas if one spoke of sadness, not in terms of this I that feels sad, then there's no accumulation. Or even to say my eyes see sadness. Right now the world looks sad, but not that I am sad. If I were to say I see sadness, it opens up a bit more of a conversation as to why one is seeing with the molecules of sadness blocking actual vision. I feel like the DNA and the molecule of emotion and the image and the word vibrations, they all activate each other. And they're all holographically interwoven. And that's the thing that prevents clear perception. And the stories are tied to the molecules holographically. And when we emote in those ways with those stories, it actually rewrites our DNA as well. It's rewritten our DNA to perceive these holograms, this holographic interference. And then the hologram tied to the emotional molecule is what picks those bits out of reality that's going to give one that hit of those emotional molecules. And it reactivates the past. And we're addicted to how we think and see the world. And that's all tied to the I, to this supposed fixed observer. But when one is in the state of insight, there's no fixed observer. One is just harvesting perceptions and meanings as measures And that's how we measure the world, is with insight, which is a creative thing. And David Bohm talks about measure in his book, and it was really fascinating how he put it. Maybe I'll talk about that later. So we see the world as we feel about it, but really it's how we feel about ourselves. And I guess that's what Gabor Mate said. And in a way, perception is seeing the world as insight, having insight into the world, and not having feelings about how the world makes me feel. That separates me from the world. So in a way, emotions are our way of keeping ourselves separate from the world.